Hello everyone, thanks for watching. My name is Sergio Barrachina-Muñoz, and in this talk I will be presenting our paper entitled Wi-Fi All-Channel Analyzer. This is a work by myself, by Professor Boris Bellalta. We are both from the Universidad Pompeu Fabra, Spain, and by Professor Edward Natalie from Rice University in the United States. Okay. So first of all, I would like to put in some context and motivate the work we present today. Basically, part of our general research focuses on multi-channel solutions for Wi-Fi, for example, dynamic channel bonding, preamble puncturing, OFDMA, etc., to use higher bandwidth per transmission. So the key idea behind increasing the bandwidth is to raise the potential capacity of the networks and thus cope with the ever-increasing demands of new applications like virtual reality or 8K video. Of course, increasing the bandwidth brings some drawbacks like a reduced power transmission or higher probability of interfering with neighboring nodes. These issues has been studied in the past years, showing great results in the literature of the four-dimension multi-channel solutions with respect to single channel. However, all these works relied on analytical models or limited test beds or simulations, and since the performance of any multi-channel solution deeply depends on the power along the frequency spectrum, knowing how the spectrum behaves in the real world was a good motivation driving this work, as we will see. So we proposed two main research questions to solve. The first one is, how is the spectrum status in general in the real world? And of course, this question is really difficult to answer, essentially because it will depend on the location and also on the time of the day we take the measurements. But we wanted to have some raw knowledge about it. And the second research question is there any potential of increasing the spectrum efficiency by using multi-channel solutions in a real-world spectrum? And it turned out to be that we needed a new dataset to do so. So as for the contributions of the paper, first we present the design of the Wi-Fi all-channel analyzer, we call it WACA, a platform for measuring the power of all the channels in the Wi-Fi's 5 GHz band simultaneously. We focus on the 5 GHz band because the other band at 2.4 has only 3 non-overlapping channels, so multi-channel solutions do not apply well in there. In contrast, in the 5 GHz band, we have 24 channels that can be bonded. So the key idea with WACA is to take a kind of screenshots of the whole spectrum so we know what is the power at all the channels at the same time. And this is the key novelty we are introducing with this work. Then we overview in the paper an extensive set of measurement campaigns we collected with WACA, including from cafeterias to hotels and even the Camp Nou Stadium, which is a super crowded scenario, as we will see in a few slides. Finally, in the paper, we propose a trace-driven framework for simulating different standard compliant and custom multi-channel solutions by using the traces we collected. And then we provide a use case for comparing contiguous versus non-contiguous channel bonding. Of course, we would like to emphasize that the dataset is open, and we expect that the community finds it a valuable asset, not only for Wi-Fi, but also for research on LTE and even the Internet of Things. Okay. So we say that the dataset presented is first of its kind because of two main reasons. The first one is that there are few multi-channel spectrum measurements of Wi-Fi, but more importantly, they rely on sequential scanning. So from measuring the first channel to measuring the last one, we have to wait a time that we do not have if we want to assess the performance of any multi-channel solution with accuracy, right? So we don't have this problem with WACA essentially because we get the power measured at the same time in all the band. As for the performance of multi-channel solutions, there is great work in the literature on different proposals. However, these works relied on limited testbeds, simulations, or analytical models, which are perfectly fine. In fact, we have contributed in the literature by writing some papers of this type. However, they have some issues that we can overcome with WACA. Essentially, we measure unlimited sources of power coming from different networks in real operational settings, so we don't have any limitations on the number of links, and we do not have to make any assumptions that we need to make in the simulations like NS3, Commander, or any other. Right? So the WACA platform is composed of 6 warp boards. Warps are software-defined radios, and each of the warps has a daughter board plugged in. So in total, we are able to measure the power in 24 antennas, thus covering all the channels in the 5 GHz band that permit channel bonding, right? So from channel 36 to channel 161. And here we have the location of the channels to each of the warps RFs. So for example, here in the first warp board, we have covered channel 36, 40, 44, and 48, right? So here we have 4 channels, and so on and so forth. Okay. As for the WACA topologies, the deployment is really simple. Essentially, we rely on a warp-lab host. This runs in MATLAB, and essentially the warp-lab host is useful for communicating with the warps. So we have the host, we have the switch, and we have the warps, of course. Here in the right picture, we have a physical realization of WACA. And you can see here the first stack with 3 warps and another stack with another 3 warps. So in total we have 24 antennas. Here behind we have the switch, and here at the right we have the host. Also in this picture we are showing a transmitter bed. Just let me emphasize that WACA does not transmit anything, so this was just for testing purposes. So this transmitter here is not included in the WACA platform, let's say. Okay. So how does WACA work? Well, WACA relies on an iterative procedure where in each iteration the warp transceivers measure the power of all the channels at the same time at a 10 microsecond rate. That is, we measure all the band. We take like a screenshot of all the power in all the band. After 10 microseconds, we get another screenshot, and so on and so forth. And the gathered RSSI is then sent to the warp-lab host, right, which processes and stores it. So, for example, in the first iteration, we measure here during a given time. In the dataset, we consider 1 second, measurements of consecutive samples of 1 second. After measuring during 1 second, we have to transmit this data to the warp-lab host, and then we start the next iteration. So when the campaign finishes, we may post-process the RSSI measurements, which come in the form of a matrix, where the rows are time instants and the columns are the channels, right? So simply by comparing the RSSI to a certain CCS threshold, we are able to get the occupancy matrix. So for example, in this example, let's assume that channel 2 observed a power of minus 90 dBms at the first time instant. So simply by comparing the minus 90 dBms with the CCA, which is normally minus 82 dBms, we can derive that the channel was idle at that moment, right? So from the RSSI matrix, we can get the occupancy matrix. And just to show an example, let's assume that we have a device with primary channel in channel number 1. So at time instant 1, the backup will be decreased by 1 unit. Time instant 2, since the channel is also empty, the backup will also diminish 1 unit. And finally, let's assume that the backup expires at the 3rd time instant. So here we will try to access the channel. And for example, we could have a multi-channel solution installed in this device. So rather than transmitting only in the first channel, as in a single channel form, we may transmit using higher bandwidth. Okay. So thanks to WACA and to our dataset, we are able to know how was the whole spectrum in all these instances. So our solution may identify that channel 3 and channel 4 were empty at the time of the backup that the backup expired, right? So rather than transmitting in 20 megahertz, we could transmit in 60 megahertz, right? By joining channel 1, channel 3, and channel 4. Okay. So as for the measurement campaigns, they were taken in Houston and Barcelona, Spain. Here we have some pictures of the measurements. This is a cafeteria in Houston. This is a parking lot in Houston. Here we have a test bed we performed in Universidad Pompeu Fabra. Here we have an apartment near La Sagrada Familia, which is one of the most touristic zones in Barcelona. Here we have a hotel, etc. And since the most let's say the most irrelevant scenario we have in the dataset is the Football Club Barcelona, we have devoted here an entire slide just for one picture of the Camp Nou stadium. And notice that in the stadium that day were 98,000 people in the audience. So it is a unique scenario, really crowded, and we consider it as a unique asset, no? Just in terms of the data set. Okay. So how does the spectrum look like, right? If you remember, we had these two research questions that we wanted to answer. And so the first question, we observe that on average, the spectrum is mostly empty in all the generic scenarios. We call generic scenarios all the scenarios not including the Football Club Barcelona one, right? So for example, here we have the Camp Nou, and here we have the other 10 locations, cafeterias, campuses, etc. So as I was, yes, as I mentioned, on average, the spectrum is mostly empty in all the bands. And this result was kind of surprising to us because we normally focus on dense scenarios with challenging situations and where we have a lot of interference. So we try to, we assess multi-channel algorithms in these so challenging scenarios. However, we have observed that in reality, most of the generic scenarios, excluding Football Club Barcelona, tend to be empty, okay? Thus without any interference problem. Of course, there are periods when this is not the case, as we will see in the next slide, but the general behavior is this. The Wi-Fi 5 GHz band is not, is practically not used. So as for the Camp Nou Stadium, this is a unique scenario, as I was mentioning, super crowded, with peaks of 99% of occupancy per channel, which is a lot. And just in case you're interested, here we observe a social behavior of the people, of the audience of the Camp Nou. So here the people were entering the stadium, and right before the game started, we observe a high peak of activity. This is just because people were uploading videos or photos to Instagram or whatever social media. And during the game, people tend to use less the phone, as is normal, because you are supposed to be watching the game. And in the halftime, we have again another peak of usage. Okay. So finally, in the paper, we propose this trace-driven framework for simulating different multi-channel solutions that we have already used for other analysis in different works that are coming to be public in short. But in the paper, we propose a simple use case, and we present an evaluation comparing the throughput performance of continuous channel bonding versus non-continuous channel bonding. I must refer you to the paper for the time limitations of this talk, but essentially what we found is that while non-continuous channel bonding is normally better than continuous channel bonding, there are some epochs where continuous wins, and this is due to resulting in different instances for transmissions attempts, right? So continuous channel bonding occasionally and quite randomly, since the traces are the same, ends up with more favorable attempts instance. Besides, we find that the average throughputs shown in this small bar chart here are quite similar, which may ultimately favor continuous channel bonding since it is simple to implement. As I mentioned, the details are in the paper. Finally, I think I'm good on time. In this paper, we have presented Waka, which is the first platform to measure the whole Wi-Fi 5 GHz band simultaneously. So we are able to get power screenshots of all the channels at the same time. And this is key to assess with accuracy any multi-channel solution that you may think of. We have also conducted extensive measurement campaigns, including Camp Nou Stadium, which is a unique scenario. We have found that the spectrum is empty on average most of the time, except on the Camp Nou Stadium again. And we have proposed a trace-driven framework to evaluate multi-channel solutions, and we have proposed a use case by comparing continuous versus non-continuous channel bonding. Okay. As future work, we will present in short analysis of key factors like spectral correlations, temporal correlations, bandwidth preventions, and so on. And again, we would like to make emphasis that this in-deep analysis can only be done if you can rely on screenshots of the power measured in the whole band, right? So the data set is open, and we expect that the research community will find it useful. So thank you so much for your attention, and if you have any questions, please go ahead. It was my pleasure.